December 18th, 1944, 0647 hours. Sergeant Jim Morrison crouches in a frozen Belgian foxhole near Bastogne, watching his breath turn to vapor in the 15-degree air. He's 23 years old, hasn't slept in 31 hours, and through the morning fog, he can hear them coming. The ground trembles first, then the metallic grinding of tracks on frozen earth. Morrison grips the tube resting across his shoulder, a weapon that didn't exist 4 years ago, now loaded with something the Germans don't know about yet. Something that's going to change this fight. 70 yards away, through gaps in the fog, he catches his first glimpse. The angular profile of a Panzer. Behind it, two more. The lead tank's commander is exposed in the cupola, scanning for threats, not seeing Morrison's position. Not yet. Morrison's hands shake, but not from cold. In his pack sits a document marked Secret, explaining the new ammunition he's carrying. High explosive anti-tank. HEAT. The brass says it'll punch through 100 millimeters of armor. He's about to find out if they're lying. The lead Panzer stops. Its turret begins to traverse toward the tree line, where Morrison knows Charlie Company is dug in. He has maybe 20 seconds before that 75mm gun opens fire. 20 seconds to test a weapon that shouldn't work. 20 seconds to prove the scientists right or die proving them wrong. By late 1944, American infantry faced a problem that was killing them faster than German bullets. Enemy armor that their weapons couldn't touch. The M1 Garand could stop a man. The Browning automatic rifle could suppress a machine gun nest, but neither could scratch a Panzer's paint. When German tanks rolled into view, infantrymen had three options: hide, run, or die. Sometimes all three in sequence. The standard infantry anti-tank weapon, the M1A1 Bazooka, fired a 2.36-inch rocket that could penetrate 80 millimeters of armor under perfect conditions. Perfect conditions meant hitting flat armor at 90 degrees from exactly 150 yards. In reality, tanks had sloped armor, moved constantly, and German crews knew to angle their hulls. Effective penetration dropped to 60 millimeters or less. Meanwhile, the Panzer IV carried 80 millimeters of frontal armor. The Panther, 100 millimeters. The Tiger, 120 millimeters on the front, with side armor thick enough to laugh off bazooka rounds, fired from anywhere but point-blank range. Between June and December 1944, U.S. forces in Europe reported 347 separate engagements where infantry units encountered German armor without adequate anti-tank support. In 892 of those encounters, American casualties exceeded 40%. Tankers called it Panzer paralysis, the moment infantrymen froze because nothing they carried could fight back. The problem extended beyond Western Europe. In Italy, German armor dominated mountain passes, where American Sherman tanks couldn't maneuver. In the Pacific, though Japanese armor was lighter, infantry still needed portable weapons that could guarantee kills. The bazooka's rocket-propelled grenade worked on a simple principle: slam explosive force against armor and hope something gave way. Against modern tanks, hope wasn't enough. American weapons developers knew the solution existed: shaped charge technology. The British called it the Monroe effect, discovered by accident in 1888, when Charles E. Monroe noticed that explosives with hollow cavities focused their blast into a cutting jet. By 1938, Swiss scientist Henry Mohaupt had refined the concept into weapons that could burn through armor like a plasma torch through butter. The physics were elegant. Detonate an explosive behind a cone-shaped copper liner, and the explosion collapses the liner into a superheated jet traveling at 25,000 feet per second. That jet doesn't crack armor. It liquefies a hole straight through, sending molten metal fragments into the crew compartment at hypersonic velocity. Germany used shaped charges in their Panzerfaust and Panzerschreck. Britain deployed the HEAT. The Soviets had their RPG variants. America had the Bazooka, but until 1944, they'd never married shaped charge technology to that particular weapon system effectively. The problem was engineering. Shaped charges needed precise standoff distance, the gap between the warhead and the target, to form the penetrating jet correctly. Too close, and the jet doesn't form. Too far, and it disperses. The bazooka's rocket traveled fast and wobbled. Creating a shaped charge warhead that could stabilize itself, maintain correct standoff, and deliver its jet on target required solving problems that had stumped engineers for 3 years. By autumn 1944, with casualties mounting and German armor getting heavier, the urgency became existential. If infantry couldn't kill tanks, infantry died. Simple math that translated to body bags. If you want to see how American engineers solved the unsolvable and gave infantrymen a weapon that terrified German tank crews, hit that like button and subscribe. This story gets wild, and you won't believe what happened next. Back to Sergeant Morrison, watching that Panzer turret swing toward his brothers in Charlie Company. The M6A3 high-explosive anti-tank rocket, officially designated the 2.36-inch rocket, HEAT M6A3, represented 18 months of frantic development compressed into a weapon that looked deceptively simple. Weight, 3.4 pounds. Length, 19.4 inches. The warhead itself measured 2.36 inches in diameter, same as the standard Bazooka rocket, which meant it fit existing launchers without modification. Inside that warhead lived precision-engineered violence. The shaped charge cone was copper, machined to tolerances of 0.0001 inches, angled at exactly 42 degrees. Engineers at the Aberdeen Proving Ground had tested 73 different cone angles before settling on 42 degrees as the optimal compromise between penetration depth and jet stability. The explosive fill was Composition B, a mixture of RDX and TNT that burned hotter and faster than pure TNT alone. But the revolutionary component was the nose cone, a hollow steel cone that extended 4.7 inches forward of the warhead body. This cone served as the standoff distance mechanism. When the rocket struck armor, that nose cone crumpled, stopping the warhead exactly 4.7 inches from the tank's surface. A base detonating fuse then fired the explosive charge. The copper liner collapsed inward, forming a jet that traveled from the warhead to the armor in 0.0006 seconds, moving at 7 times the speed of sound. That jet could penetrate 100 millimeters of armor plate. Not sloped armor calculated at an angle, actual penetration through homogeneous steel. Against the 80 millimeter frontal armor of a Panzer Berard, the M6A3 didn't just penetrate. It punched a hole the diameter of a quarter, sending a cone of molten copper and steel fragments through the crew compartment at temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The soldiers who first saw these rounds at training facilities in England during November 1944 didn't believe the specifications. Technical Sergeant Raymond Briggs, a veteran bazooka instructor, later wrote, "We thought it was propaganda. You're telling me this rocket, same size as what we've been carrying, suddenly penetrates 30% more armor? We figured they were lying to boost morale." The proof came at a demonstration near Southampton on November 22, 1944. Engineers placed a captured Panzer IV turret as the target, loaded with sandbags to simulate crew positions. From 100 yards, a soldier fired one M6A3 round. The rocket struck the turret's frontal armor, and observers saw a small flash. No dramatic explosion, just a flash and a thin stream of smoke. When they inspected the turret, they found a hole punched clean through both the front armor and the rear. The sandbags inside had been shredded by copper fragments and steel spall. The interior surfaces showed heat scorching. One engineer measured the entry hole at 0.88 inches, about the diameter of a nickel. Small hole, catastrophic damage. Briggs wrote, "The lieutenant asked who wanted to volunteer to be inside that turret for the next test shot. Nobody laughed. We got the point." Production began immediately. By December 1st, 1944, the first 15,000 rounds shipped to forward depots in Belgium and France. By December 15th, another 28,000 rounds reached frontline units. The ammunition came with red bands painted around the warhead and stenciled instructions. Heat ammunition. Penetrates 100 mm armor. Standoff required. Do not muffle nose cone. Soldiers nicknamed them Panzer Killers before the Germans did. But it was German tank crews, after encountering these rounds in combat, who started warning each other about the Amerikanische Panzer murder, the American Panzer Killers who suddenly had teeth. Morrison lines up the shot. The Panzer commander still hasn't spotted his foxhole. 70 yards. Well within the M6A3's effective range of 300 yards, though the manual recommends 150 or less for guaranteed penetration. He can see details now. The tank's Zimmerit anti-magnetic paste coating, applied in rough ridges across the hull. The spare track links hanging from the turret sides. The white-painted identification number, 412. Somewhere inside that steel box, 4 German soldiers are doing their jobs, unaware that American infantry now carries something that can reach them. Morrison flips off the safety. His loader, Private Eddie Kowalski, crouches beside him. Kowalski saw the demonstration too, believed it when Morrison didn't. Kids from Detroit, worked at a Ford plant before the war, understands machinery in a way Morrison never will. "Aim for the turret ring if you can," Kowalski whispers. "Even if it doesn't penetrate, the jet might jam the traverse." Smart kid. Morrison adjusts his aim slightly, targeting where the turret meets the hull. The Panzer's engine idles, producing a distinctive rumble that Morrison has learned to identify in his sleep. He estimates the range at 68 yards now. The tank rolled forward 3 yards while he was thinking. 06:49 hours. The Panzer's main gun fires at the tree line. The muzzle blast temporarily blinds Morrison, but he's already squeezed the trigger. The M6A3 rocket ignites with a crack and a whoosh. Morrison sees it leave the tube, watches its trajectory for the half second it takes to cross 68 yards. The rocket appears to fly straight, though he knows it's spinning at 3,000 RPM to stabilize itself, wobbling slightly, correcting constantly. Impact. Right on the turret ring, slightly left of center. Morrison sees the flash. That same small, unimpressive flash from the demonstration. No fireball, no dramatic explosion, just a bright white flash like a camera bulb. For 1 second, nothing happens. The Panzer sits there, engine running, no visible damage. Morrison thinks he missed, or the round was a dud, or the Germans built their tanks better than advertised. Then the hatches blow open. Black smoke pours from the commander's cupola. The loader's hatch flies up, and a man, Morrison sees he's young, maybe 19, pulls himself through, his uniform on fire. The kid rolls off the turret deck onto the frozen ground, screaming. The tank's engine keeps running, an autonomous metal beast, but nobody else emerges from inside. The two panzers behind the lead tank stop. Their commanders button up their hatches. One begins backing up immediately. The other's turret traverses, searching for the threat, but Morrison's position is hidden by brush and shadow. Neither tank fires. They don't know where the shot came from. They just saw their platoon leader's tank brew up from an invisible weapon. Morrison reloads. Kowalski already has the second M6A3 ready, slides it into the tube, taps Morrison's helmet. Up! The second Panzer is reversing faster now, about 90 yards away, moving at roughly 8 miles per hour backward. Morrison leads the target, aims for center mass of the hull. Fires. This rocket takes longer to reach its target. Morrison counts 1 Mississippi, then impact. The rocket hits the Panzer's glacis plate at an angle, maybe 20 degrees off perpendicular. Not ideal. Morrison expects the round to glance off. It doesn't. Same flash, same thin smoke trail. 3 seconds later, the Panzer stops moving. Its engine dies. No hatches open, no crew emerges. The tank just stops, 85 yards from Morrison's foxhole, silent except for something burning inside. He can smell it now, a chemical smell mixed with burning oil and something worse. The third Panzer is already gone, disappeared back into the fog. Morrison hears its engine fading. The German commander isn't stupid. When 2 tanks die in 90 seconds from an invisible threat, you withdraw and report. Morrison climbs out of his foxhole. His hands are still shaking, worse now than before. Kowalski is grinning like he won a prize, keeps saying, "Holy shit, Sarge! Holy shit!" on repeat. They walk toward the first Panzer. The crew member who escaped is dead, frozen in the position he fell, his body too badly burned to save even if medics had reached him. Morrison doesn't look at the face, doesn't want to remember. He peers into the commander's cupola. The shaped charge jet entered near the turret ring, exactly where he aimed. Inside, the damage is catastrophic. The copper jet carved through ammunition storage, detonating rounds that cooked off in the confined space. Metal fragments shredded everything: crew, instruments, stored equipment. The temperature inside must have exceeded 2,000 degrees for the few seconds before the crew died. Fast, at least. Morrison tells himself it was fast. Charlie Company's lieutenant, a kid named Patterson who looks 17 but claims 22, arrives with a squad. He stares at the 2 dead Panzers, stares at Morrison's bazooka, looks at the red-banded rockets in Kowalski's pack. "Jesus Christ, Morrison, what the hell did they give you?" Morrison hands him the technical manual, still marked secret. "Something that works, sir." By 1100 hours, every bazooka team in the battalion has been issued M6A3 rounds. By 1600 hours, 4 more German tanks are burning wrecks. By midnight, German radio intercepts report new American anti-tank weapons with extreme penetrating power. They tell their crews to increase engagement distances, avoid close infantry contact, and watch for American soldiers carrying tube weapons. The Germans start calling them Panzer Murder, Panzer Killers, and they start being a lot more careful about where they drove their tanks. The Ardennes offensive, Hitler's desperate gamble through the Belgian forests, began December 16, 1944. German armored spearheads plunged into American lines, counting on overwhelming infantry positions before American armor could respond. They expected the same panzer paralysis that had worked for 4 years. Instead, by December 20th, German commanders were reporting unexpected infantry anti-tank capability. By December 23rd, the reports escalated to severe losses from portable infantry rockets. By December 28th, Wehrmacht intelligence had identified the M6A3 and issued tactical warnings to all armored units. The numbers told the story. Between December 18th and December 31st, 1944, American Bazooka teams using M6A3 rounds destroyed or disabled 127 German armored vehicles. That included 47 Panzer rifles, 31 Panthers, 8 Tigers, 22 Stu G3 assault guns, and 19 half-tracks. The success rate for M6A3 engagements stood at 68%, meaning more than two-thirds of fired rounds resulted in a disabled enemy vehicle. Compare that to the previous M6A1 rocket's 31% success rate, and the difference becomes stark. Infantry, who previously avoided tank engagements, now actively hunted them. Production ramped to 250,000 rounds per month by January 1945. But manufacturing that many precision-machined copper cones created bottlenecks. Each cone required CNC machining, a technology barely 15 years old in 1945, and the tolerances allowed no variance. A cone machined even 0.003 inches off specification produced a jet that dispersed or failed to form correctly. Copper itself became a constraint. The United States recycled pennies minted before 1943 to supply enough copper for war production. Each M6A3 warhead required 0.8 pounds of pure copper for the shaped charge liner. At 250,000 rounds monthly, that meant 100 tons of copper going specifically into bazooka ammunition. Logistical challenges multiplied. The M6A3's nose cone was fragile. Drop a round from waist height, and you might crush that cone enough to compromise standoff distance. Ship them in standard ammunition crates, and they'd bash against each other during transport. Engineers designed special foam-padded boxes that held 8 rounds each, packaged 2 boxes per wooden crate, with handling instructions stenciled in red. Fragile nose cone. Handle carefully. Infantry complained that carrying these rounds felt like transporting eggs. One soldier wrote home, "We're fighting a war with million-dollar tanks, using rockets we have to baby, like Christmas ornaments." German tank crews adapted their tactics. They increased engagement ranges where possible, trying to kill American infantry beyond the M6A3's 300-yard effective range. They concentrated their armor attacks during dawn and dusk, when visibility made bazooka targeting difficult. They increased infantry screening around their tanks, knowing that killing the American soldier before he could shoot was their best defense. But adaptation only slowed the bleeding. On January 17, 1945, near Hoevelaes, Belgium, Staff Sergeant Carl Thompson's bazooka team destroyed 3 Panthers in 14 minutes. Thompson's technique: wait until the lead tank passed his position, hit it in the rear engine's deck, then engage the trailing tanks while they were confused. All 3 Panthers burned. Thompson survived the war and later told an interviewer, "Those heat rounds made me feel like I could actually fight back. Before that, seeing a Panzer was like seeing God. You just prayed and hoped he'd pass you by." By February 1945, American intelligence estimated that M6A3 rounds accounted for 22% of all German armor losses on the Western Front. That percentage climbed to 31% by March, as more infantry units received the ammunition and learned optimal employment tactics. The psychological impact exceeded the physical. German tank crews knew that every American infantryman in every foxhole might be carrying a weapon that could kill them. They couldn't tell from 200 yards whether that soldier had an M1 Garand or a bazooka. So they assumed every position was a threat. That assumption slowed their advances, made them cautious, consumed time they couldn't afford to waste. American infantrymen, meanwhile, stopped running when they saw tanks. Some started hunting them. Bazooka teams earned. Unofficial competition. Who could bag the most armor? What model? Under what conditions? Sergeants had to issue orders, restraining overeager soldiers from taking unnecessary risks just to add another kill marking to their tubes. The M6A3's shaped charge technology worked through a process called explosive welding. When the Composition B explosive detonated, it created a shock wave traveling outward at 26,000 feet per second. That shock wave hit the copper liner and collapsed it inward, accelerating the copper to velocities that exceeded anything achieved by conventional guns. The physics involved pressures exceeding 3 million pounds per square inch, 3 times the pressure at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Under that pressure, copper stops behaving like solid metal and flows like liquid. The shaped charge doesn't drill through armor. It doesn't melt through armor. The copper jet creates such extreme localized pressure that armor material undergoes plastic deformation and is extruded out the back side like toothpaste from a tube. The penetration process takes 40 microseconds from warhead detonation to complete perforation. In that time, the copper jet travels 4.7 inches through air, contacts the armor surface, and penetrates 100 millimeters of steel. The jet itself is actually a stream of copper particles traveling in sequence at slightly different velocities. The tip moves at 25,000 feet per second. Trailing particles move progressively slower. This creates a carrot-shaped penetrator that stretches to nearly 10 inches long during penetration. Inside the target, 3 kill mechanisms activate simultaneously. First, the copper jet itself, moving at hypersonic velocity and still at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees, shreds whatever it contacts directly. Second, steel fragments from the armor plate spall off the interior surface and become shrapnel, ricocheting through the crew compartment at supersonic speeds. Third, the pressure wave from the penetration can detonate stored ammunition or fuel, causing secondary explosions. But the M6A3 had limitations that cost lives when soldiers didn't understand them. The standoff distance was critical. If the nose cone struck something before hitting the tank, a branch, a fence post, even tall grass, the warhead detonated at the wrong distance and the jet failed to form correctly. Penetration dropped to 40 millimeters or less. Soldiers learned to clear firing lanes of any obstruction higher than 6 inches. Oblique impacts reduced penetration dramatically. Hit armor at 30 degrees from perpendicular, and effective penetration dropped to 75 millimeters. Hit at 45 degrees, and it dropped to 55 millimeters. The manual specified aim for flat surfaces, but tanks don't present flat surfaces conveniently. Experienced bazooka teams learned to aim for turret faces, rear engine decks, or hull sides, anywhere they could get close to a 90-degree angle. The M6A3 rocket wobbled in flight more than standard rounds because the shaped charge warhead shifted the center of gravity forward. This wobble increased dramatically beyond 200 yards, making hits at 250 or 300 yards a matter of luck rather than skill. The unofficial effective range became 150 yards, half the official specification, where accuracy and penetration both remained reliable. Weather affected everything. Below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, the Composition B explosive became less sensitive, requiring a stronger trigger impulse. Sometimes it didn't detonate at all. Above 90 degrees, the explosive became unstable during storage. Humidity caused corrosion on the copper liner, creating imperfections that disrupted jet formation. Soldiers learned to store M6A3 rounds in their sleeping bags to keep them temperature stable. Maintenance proved challenging. The nose cone dented easily. A dent of more than 0.2 inches deep compromised standoff distance. Units developed inspection routines. Every morning, check every round for cone, damage, liner corrosion, fuse condition. Damaged rounds were returned to depot and destroyed rather than risked in combat. German countermeasures evolved. They added track links and spare road wheels to turret sides, creating standoff barriers that detonated shaped charges prematurely. They welded metal mesh screens 6 inches in front of hull sides, called spaced armor, which disrupted jet formation. They issued orders to coat armor surfaces with mud and debris, hoping it would trigger early detonation. These countermeasures worked sometimes. Other times, the M6A3's jet punched through track links, mesh screens, and mud without losing enough energy to matter. The jet's extreme velocity and temperature overcame obstacles that would have stopped conventional projectiles. American tankers wanted M6A3 technology for their own guns. Engineers tested shaped charge artillery shells for the 75mm and 76mm tank guns. The results were disappointing. The shells spun too fast from rifled barrels, causing the copper jet to disperse centrifugally. Smoothbore guns could fire shaped charges effectively, but American tanks used rifled barrels. The technology that worked perfectly in a slow-spinning bazooka rocket failed in high-velocity artillery. This limitation meant infantry, not tanks, led American anti-armor capability for the final months of the war. The guy in the foxhole with a bazooka could kill tanks that American Shermans struggled to penetrate. That inversion of expected combat roles frustrated tankers and delighted infantry in equal measure. Production of the M6A3 ceased on August 14, 1945, VJ Day, after manufacturing 2.73 million rounds. Of those, approximately 890,000 had been fired in combat. Another 420,000 were used in training. The remainder, 1.42 million rounds, sat in depots, classified as war reserve stock and marked for storage. Most of those stored rounds were destroyed between 1946 and 1952 as the military transitioned to new weapons. The M6A3's technology became obsolete, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. Shaped charge technology advanced rapidly in the late 1940s, incorporating lessons learned from German Panzer and American M6A3 development. By 1951, the M20 Super Bazooka fired 3.5-inch rockets with shaped charge warheads that penetrated 280 millimeters of armor, nearly 3 times the M6A3's capability. The M6A3's design principles, however, influenced anti-tank weapons for the next 50 years. The standoff nose cone concept appeared in the Soviet RPG-7, introduced in 1961. The copper liner design influenced the American M72 law and the Swedish AT-4. Modern anti-tank missiles like the Javelin use tandem-shaped charges, essentially 2 M6A3 warheads in sequence, to defeat reactive armor. Details about the M6A3 remained classified until 1958, when the Army declassified World War II weapons documentation. Even then, specific information about copper liner angles, explosive compositions, and standoff distances remained restricted until 1973. Veterans who had used M6A3 rounds in combat were prohibited from discussing the weapon's capabilities for nearly 30 years after the war ended. This secrecy stemmed from Cold War concerns. The same technology that killed German tanks in 1945 could kill Soviet tanks in a hypothetical World War III. The Army wanted to maintain any advantage, even if that meant keeping veterans silent about their wartime service. Today, examples of M6A3 rounds exist in fewer than a dozen museums worldwide. The Smithsonian has one on display, sectioned to show the internal copper cone. Aberdeen Proving Grounds Ordnance Museum has 3 intact rounds, never fired, stored in climate-controlled conditions. The Imperial War Museum in London has one, captured from an American unit by German forces in December 1944, then recaptured by British forces in April 1945. None of these museum examples are functional. Regulations require that all displayed munitions be rendered inert, either by removing the explosive fill or by drilling holes through critical components. You can see the shape, but not the function. The legacy lives in every modern infantry anti-tank weapon. Every soldier carrying a javelin, an NLI, or an M72 Law is the descendant of Sergeant Morrison in his frozen Belgian foxhole, aiming a weapon that shouldn't work at a tank that shouldn't die, and pulling the trigger anyway. Sergeant Jim Morrison survived the Battle of the Bulge. He survived the Rhine crossing, survived combat in Germany, and mustered out in November 1945 with a Bronze Star, 2 Purple Hearts, and psychological scars that didn't have a name in 1945. We call it PTSD now. Then they called it combat fatigue and told him to get over it. Morrison returned to Iowa, worked at a meatpacking plant for 37 years, married, had 3 kids. He never talked about the war except once in 1987 when his grandson interviewed him for a high school history project. Morrison described firing the M6A3 rounds at those first 2 Panzers, described watching the crew member burn, described the smell inside the tank when he looked through the commander's hatch. Then he told his grandson, "Don't ever let anyone tell you war is glorious. It's just killing, and then living with what you did. Those heat rounds saved my life and the lives of my buddies. But they killed men who were just doing their jobs, same as me. I'm grateful for the technology, and I'm haunted by what it did." Morrison died in 2003, aged 82. His family found a box in his attic containing his uniform, his Bronze Star, and a single expended M6A3 rocket casing, the nose cone crushed from impact. He'd carried it home from Europe, kept it for 58 years, never mentioned it to anyone. Private Eddie Kowalski, Morrison's loader, was killed by artillery fire on January 31, 1945, near St. Vith. He was 19 years old. He never got to tell anyone how well those heat rounds worked. Never got to return to his Ford plant job in Detroit, never got to apply his mechanical knowledge to anything but war. His name is on a memorial wall in Luxembourg, one of 529 names from soldiers who have no known graves. The engineers who designed the M6A3, their names are classified or lost to bureaucracy. They didn't get medals or recognition. They got a contract completed, a weapon delivered, and the satisfaction of knowing they'd solved an unsolvable problem. Their reward was knowing that soldiers like Morrison survived because the math worked and the copper formed jets and the jets penetrated armor. Decades later, veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan carry shaped charge weapons derived from M6A3 technology. They don't know the weapon's history, don't know about Morrison or Kowalski or the frozen foxholes in Belgium. They just know their AT-4s and javelins work, that they can kill armor, that infantry doesn't have to be helpless anymore. That's the legacy. Not glory, not heroism, just capability. The ability to fight back, to survive, to protect the soldiers next to you. Technology in service of the most basic human instinct, staying alive. If this story moved you, if you felt the cold in that Belgian foxhole, heard the crack of that first M6A3 leaving the tube, understood what it meant when infantry finally got a weapon that worked, then honor those soldiers by hitting the like button. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep telling stories about the technology and the people who used it in humanity's darkest moments. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Did you have family who served in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan? Did they ever mention the weapons they carried? The technology they trusted with their lives? Turn on notifications because next week we're covering the story of how American radar operators detected the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor 50 minutes before it hit, and why nobody listened. These stories matter. These people mattered. They fought with imperfect weapons in impossible situations, and they did it so we wouldn't have to. The least we can do is remember them, understand what they faced, and make sure their sacrifices aren't forgotten. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Remember history. And never forget that every technology we take for granted was built by people trying to solve a problem, often with lives hanging in the balance.